Earlier, we went over updating an event, persisting the update, and we also created a new branch to test what branching is about. So we created a new branch and we deleted the data persistence folders and we included the data persistence via a Swift package. Yes?
So which branch are we working on
right now? We'll go back to master. Okay? We'll go back to master because I only wanted to show us how to create a branch. We'll go back to master because if not, I also have to show you how to change your default branch. And I don't want it to all be about branching today. It's just a small introduction to branching. So we'll go back to master via Xcode. So go back to Xcode. Go to Xcode. Go to your source project navigator. Go to Xcode, go to your source package navigator. Make sure you push all your changes before you do anything. So make sure that you pushed all your changes. Make sure there's nothing to commit here. There's nothing to commit on my Xcode, right? If there's anything to commit, put a commit message and push. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. If there's nothing to commit, click on your branches folder here in Xcode, and we have two branches. Your current branch is what? Including data persistence, correct? So now I want to check out, I want to go back to master. I want to go back to master. In terminal, the command is get checkout the branch you want to go to. In Xcode, I simply right click on the branch I want to go to, and I click on checkout. Okay? The branch I want to go to, and I click on checkout, and it asks me, do you want to check out master? I say checkout, and now, like magic, I'm back on master, and master says current. And to prove that we're on master, if we go to our project files, look at that, our data persistence folder is still there. Yes? So verify that your master is now the current branch. Everybody? Cool? And go ahead and run the app. You shouldn't have any errors because we left master running correctly. Okay? So now we'll continue working on the application. What we'll work on now is subclassing UITabBarController. We'll subclass UITabBarController in order to give a data persistence instance to the schedule tab and also to the completed tab. Okay? So let's go and do that. So in our controllers, we'll create a new file, Command N, create a new file, CocoaTouch class, subclass of UI, subclass of what? UITabBarController. And we'll simply call it schedules tab. Okay. So we've subclassed many classes before. We subclassed UI collection view cell, UI collection table view cell. We subclassed a lot of things. So here we're subclassing UITabBarController. We'll press next, and we'll press create. Great. Let's clean up our code a little bit here. Questions? Okay, so this class is called Schedules Tab Controller. We created a new class, subclass of UITabBarController. It will manage our tabs. Let's go over to our main storyboard and change the class name in the identity inspector. So click on the main storyboard, and this is our main tab, right? This is our main tab. We created a class to manage that tab controller. Like we've done in the past, we'll give it a class. We'll click on the tab controller. We'll go over to the identity inspector, and we'll copy the same class name, and we'll paste it in to the storyboard ID. I did not realize I actually gave the thing the class name already. Because the class name here would be default UITabBarController, everybody, right? So in your own project, if you want to change this, you do it the same way we always did. You click on it, you make it the class that you just subclassed. Everybody? Any questions? Okay, cool. And while you're here, make sure the storyboard ID is the same. Okay, let's see how that works. So if we go back to our subclass, let me take your tab controller and put it at the top of the controllers and put a breakpoint right into the viewDidLoad there. Okay, put a breakpoint right into the viewDidLoad and run the app. I want to verify that it's actually running correctly. So if it's running correctly, which is not here, we have a problem. Yes, we do. Very good. It works for you. Let me verify. Awesome. Let's run it again. And my breakpoint got activated. Okay? So before you write more code, you have to test things. Like, is my viewDidLoad getting called in my subclass? If it's not getting called, you need to fix it before you do anything else. In our case here, our viewDidLoad got called because now that class manages the tab bar controller. Everybody? Questions? Questions? Okay. A tab bar controller, what's a tab bar controller? What does it have? A tab bar controller has a property called viewControllers. We will set up the viewControllers property with the navigation controllers that the tab bar has. So let's see, let's go back to storyboard so we can talk about this. Zoom here. So here we have a tab bar. Yeah, I said, oh, was that the thing? In the viewDidLoad. Go back to the identity inspector of the tab bar controller. Click on the tab bar controller, go to the identity inspector. In classes, just delete the class name that's there and put in schedules tab bar controller and press enter. You're welcome. So here we have our tab bar controller. It's the root controller. Everybody, that's the root controller of my view hierarchy. Tab bar controller gets called. First thing that gets on screen is my tab bar controller. The viewDidLoad gets called of it. In the tab bar controller subclass, I have an opportunity to do any configurations I want to the view controllers. Okay? I could give the view controllers information. The information I want to give them is, hey, tab bar 1, I want to give you an instance of data persistence. Okay? Tab bar B, I want to give you an instance of the same data persistence. This is what we're trying to do. This is why we subclass UITabBarController. Okay? Because without that code, there's no way for us to give those view controllers the information they need. Yes, exactly. We'll get an instance, as Amin is pointing out here, we'll get an instance into our subclass from storyboard, right? Because we're not creating a new instance, open curly, right? We're getting an instance from storyboard. Okay? This is very important. We'll get an instance from storyboard, and then that instance, we will inject it with the data persistence. Okay, the property it needs. So let's go ahead and do that. Before we do that, we remember from yesterday, anytime you want to get an instance of a storyboard scene, what's the #1 thing you have to do? How do you get an instance of a storyboard scene into your code? Call it, that's one way, that's right. That's the objective, right? To call it, yes. But what do we need? What piece of information do we need? Identifier, right? So we need to give them identifiers. So let's give them identifiers. Very good. So we'll give our navigation controller an identifier. So click on your navigation controller and give it an identifier here in the ID section. We could call this one schedules NavController. Press enter. So we have a schedules NavController. It has an ID. And we'll go down to the completed NavController. We'll call it completed NavController. NavController. Press enter. So we have completed NavController and we have schedules NavController. So those two have IDs. While we're here, we'll also give those IDs if they don't have IDs. So we'll give the schedules list controller an ID. And again, we'll use the same name of the class. Which one? This one we called schedules NavController. Right? And the view controllers themselves will use the same classes. So the nav controllers, we just call them whatever the tab name is, nav controller. And the view controllers, we use the same class name. So we'll do the same thing with recently used or recently completed. Okay? So we just set up how many IDs? We set up 4 IDs or 5 if we count the tab controller. Okay, so everything has an ID. Okay, let's continue on. Any questions before we move on? Okay. So let's go back to our tab controller. We need to create instances of the 2 tabs. Well, not create necessarily, but get instances. The top one was, let me go back here. So we have, let me zoom in here. Okay. Which, this tab? Table view. This one, it's the same class name. So it was called schedule list controller. We copied it and we pasted it in the, and the other one is the same, right? So you go here, it's recently completed, we take the class name and we pasted it in here. Cool? Very good. But the nav controllers themselves, they don't have classes, so there's no, like, it's just a generic UI nav controller. Awesome. Okay, so here we get instances of the 2 tabs from storyboard. And we'll use private LazyBars for this. So private LazyBar. What do I call this? Schedule list, schedule list, just call it schedule nav controller. It's of type UI navigation controller. Let's get some more space going on here. Okay. Perfect. So here, what do we need to do? Let's get an instance of it from the controller, from the storyboard. So we'll say let NavController equal to storyboard dot instantiate with ID. And here the ID is schedules NavController as UI navigation controller. Fatal error here, and we'll say could not load nav controller. And we'll use chaining. We'll say chain this to also get our schedules list controller. We'll get our schedule list controller from our nav controller dot first as schedule list controller. Here we'll return nav controller. dot view controllers dot first. Okay. What are we doing here? We're doing a bit of work. First, we get in the navigation controller, the same way it's diagrammed in our storyboard. This is what we're trying to do. The tab controller is connected to a navigation controller. First, get that. And then from that, retrieve whatever it's pointing to. So first, we get the navigation controller here with the schedules navigation control ID. Then we say, hey, navigation controller, get me your first view controller. Your first view controller, we typecast it to the controller we expect. In this case here, now we have our navigation controller. Okay? And our navigation controller, we said that our tab controller has a view controllers array. So here we'll give it the first view controller. We'll say nav, not nav controller. We'll say schedules nav controller. So currently it has one navigation controller. We need to get access to the second one. So whatever we just did, we need to do it again. So next step, very similar. We have a LazyBar. We'll call it recently completed. Just call it completed nav controller. Completed nav controller is of type UI navigation controller. And here we are saying guard let nav controller. Yes, we could write an extension for this, but let's get typing it out to understand what's happening. So first I have my storyboard. I say storyboard, get me the view controller with the ID that matches completed nav controller. Okay? I need to typecast it as the type I'm expecting. If I do not typecast this, what type is it? If I was to option click on nav controller, it's a UI navigation controller, right? So now I need to typecast it to a UI navigation controller. And we said we are chaining to also get access to the recently completed controller. And that will be the nav controller dot view controllers and we typecast it to our recently, where is it? What did I call it? Completed schedule controller. Okay. If we do not get it, something went wrong here. We could not load nav controller. Nav controller, nav controller, nav controller. Yes. With the first one or the second one? The first one? I want us to type it, so we'll type it again together. Yeah. Okay, so here we want to return nav controller. Again, we could write an extension for this to just return us some view controller. But before we get to writing that extension, we need to understand how to get where we want to go to. And how do we get where we want to go to? First, we get access to the UI navigation controller. Then we access the child controller in that case, or the first view controller. That's it, 2 things we're doing. But the only thing here is we getting it from the storyboard, right? So yesterday we got only 1 instance from a storyboard. Here we basically using the first instance to get to the second thing. And we want to get to that second thing to say, hey, go ahead and set properties on yourself. How's a minute bench? Good? Okay. Okay. Let me get rid of the bottom thing here. At the very top, we'll create ourselves a private data persistence. Data persistence of type event. File name, schedules. How you doing, Chelsea? I'll slack out this when I'm done. So data persistence, event, file name. Okay, perfect. So what does this guy need? We will give the schedule list a data persistence. Right now it doesn't have a public data persistence. We'll give it a public data persistence and we'll set it. And we'll remove the data persistence it has itself. So here, set data persistence property. And here we need to do the same thing. So they both will have the same instance of that data persistence. I think I could select this out. Okay, I stacked it out. Let's get onboarded here. Make sure we have no errors, build. And then we'll go over to the view controller to do some refactoring. Because the view controller right now will not be able to create its own data persistence. It will get a data persistence from, very similar to when we do a prepare for segue, it will get it from its parent. Okay? Chelsea, did you get the code? We're not on the package anymore. You should be back on master.
No, like in general, it just, like, it was all messed up from before, so it's still messed up. And
Oh, you don't have a data persistence right now?
No, everything's,
You need to go back to you on your master branch.
I don't know, even though I deleted it from the second branch.
Get it from online, like what we have. But we'll get back to get it. Yeah. How are we doing? Did we get the code in Slack? Are we all good? I just want to make sure that there's no errors right now before we continue. How are we doing? Can we move over to schedule list control? I'm missing that. No. Some people will not. Some people miss some part of the code there.
I'm still like by the private where I'm trying to, because it's not popping up on its own, so I'm having to type up everything.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay, let's talk about what's happening. So we're all familiar with a lazy variable, right? We're all familiar with getting an instance from a storyboard. What are we doing here? We're getting the instance of the navigation controller from storyboard. That's what we're doing with the first line here. The navigation controller, it gets us the instance from storyboard. In our chaining, the second chain on line 18 says navigation controller, get me your first controller. Each of those navigation controllers are attached to a view controller, correct? Get me that view controller. That's what we're doing there. Very similar to what we did yesterday, plus one extra step. And that's how you get an instance from a storyboard. Okay? Any questions? Yes, sir.
Does that mean we have access to the outlets also?
Yes. So Seren's question was, does that mean we have access, or will that give that view controller its outlets? Yes. As it appears in storyboard, it will appear here. Okay? Whatever you have on your navigation controller, for example, if you have a tab item, it will have that as well. If you do not get the instance of the navigation controller from the storyboard with the tab item, it won't have it when you show it up, when it appears, okay? So that's like one of the steps. If you're using a subclass of UITabBarController, you have to actually get the navigation controller instance in order to also get the tab item at the bottom. Okay, so let's go over to our schedule list controller first. Let's do one step at a time. What are we doing here? This guy needs to be refactored. And this guy will be refactored here. Refactored here. Okay. That's all we need to do. That's all we need to do here. So now we could inject this data persistence from the parent. Let's go ahead and do so. So make sure that you updated your schedule list data persistence. Okay? Okay. Go back to your tab controller, and right at line 21, we'll say schedule list controller dot data persistence equal to data persistence. We should be able to test it now and have it work, because now it has the same data persistence. Schedule list should be the same spell, right? If you spell it differently, you won't get data there. But if you did maintain the same name, schedules.plist, you should get data back. Let's go ahead and test it before we do anything else. Crash number 1, what's happening? Storyboard does not contain schedule list. That's a spelling error here. Let me see what my storyboard ID is. Storyboard ID for my schedule list control, navigation controller. Of course I spelled it wrong. Be careful here, I've said it in the past. So here I'm crashing because my ID does not match. So I'll copy my ID and I'll go back to my subclass and paste in my ID. And before we forget, also add in our completed NavController and run it again. Crash number 2. Completed does not contain a view controller identifier. Completed. Also spelling error. Let's see what's going on. Go back to my main storyboard. Go back to my second tab and completed NavController. I copied completed NavController. I went back, completed NavController. 3 L's. This guy. Okay. Somebody gotta That's 2, not 3 yet. All right, Christian, I see you. All right, run it again. It's good to get those errors because those will happen to us. And when they happen, we need to know how to fix them. Right? So the first 2, both of them, the IDs were wrong. So when you put your ID, copy your ID, paste it into your code. Everybody? Right? Don't go by memory. Right? Especially when you're getting closer to that age there. Okay, that's where, that's in the subclass. Okay, let's go back to it. 1 second, guys, 1 second. Question here. 1 second, 1 second. Here. Let me see your code. She got it before I even got there. Okay, how we doing? We should, if all went well, we should get our app back like it was before, right? No. One at a time? Make sure your view did load. Tiffany, make sure in your view did load, your view controllers has both of those tabs there. Right? And as we saw, I had 2 errors. I saw what the errors were, I fixed them. The 2 errors were both ID errors. So knowing how to recognize those errors and fixing them will just get you that much better with debugging code, right? You see the error, Xcode gives us a good description as to what's going on. We go back, we verify what our ID is, and we fix it. Scroll up. Is that good? Is that good? Okay. All right. How we looking? How we looking? We good? Are we back to where we were? Eric, what's your error? We have, yes. The tab bar has a view controllers property. Tab bar has a property called view controllers. If your subclass is a UITabBarController, it has a view controllers property on it. Cameron, how you doing? Cameron, how you doing? Where are you? View did load. View did load. We only assign the things we just created to the view controllers property. Matt, how you doing?
It should run
like the same.
Yeah,
Like, yeah. Yeah. Where, in the view controller? Here? You have a comma and you have NavController.viewControllers.first.
What did you do in schedule list controller? It was something that you did in schedule list controller.
Because you want to get to the view controller itself.
But it's letting you load that.
Yes.
And it's not crashing. It's not.
Oh. What's that? Oh, you want me to go to the schedule list controller? The only thing we changed was this line. You need to give it to objects. How are we doing? Cameron? Okay. What have we just done there? Let's go over what we did. So, we subclass, the reason why we subclass in the UITabBarController is in order to give its view controllers, in that case we have two view controllers, the data persistence instance, right? And later when we come back from break, the reason again, even to go further, is to create a delegate on our data persistence. That way, when data persistence updates in view A, view B could get notifications about it. Okay? Okay? Any questions before we move on? This is very similar to what we did yesterday, only one further step. We went one level deeper. We went to the navigation controller's view controller. Any questions? And we added optional chaining with the guard statement, right? Optional chaining with the guard statement. Our view did load. Our TabBarController has a view controllers array because as we see in storyboard, we have a view controllers because there could be many view controllers. As we get closer to next week, we'll be doing more code. We need to get familiar with how to do things in code. Set up.
I'm sorry, can you go to your schedule list controller?
In our schedule list controller, the one line we changed was line 19.
Right, that's what I have. It says expected type, expected member or constructed call. It says
Do you have an equal sign? Remove the equal sign and put colon.
Why don't you have the founding part?
Okay, and that should, I'm sorry, say that again.
Why don't you have the founding part?
The file name. Oh, the file name is coming from the NavController subclass. Is the one that creates the file. Those guys don't create anything anymore. They only get an instance of it. They get an instance of the same thing, right? That's why it's a class here, everybody. All right, awesome, good question. Did that work for you, Tiffany? Okay, let's keep going. So we created our subclass. We injected view controller 1 with the data persistence. Let's go ahead and inject view controller 2. View controller 2, click on it. Completed events, nothing is really happening here yet. Go to completed scheduler, schedule controller. And let's also give it a data persistence instance and data persistence event. Okay? So we in the schedule, in the completed schedule controller, and we created this data persistence variable, which will also inject from the subclass of the UITabBarController. Let's go ahead and do so. So in our TabBarController subclass, we will go ahead and set that data persistence property on our recently completed. Let's just change this, make that easier. Just put completed controller dot data persistence equal to data persistence.
Can you go over that again?
No, that's fine. What's sorry, Mel, go over that again.
No, I just wanted to see what
Oh, I just changed the name. It was a bit lengthy there. It was recently completed controller. I just changed it to completed controller. Okay, how are we doing? Questions? Questions?
My thing is broken and you're moving so fast I can't keep up.
Yeah, the last one we just completed.
But it'll be the same thing even though it has a 2 behind it, because it's
What's the other project?
I assume that's what it
It's
is.
good? Okay, anybody else in a non-working area there? Everybody's working, yeah? Yours is working?
No.
I'll help you after the fact. I think we have 2 people so far, right? We're getting close to the end here. Okay. Keep in mind the only thing we did, there's nothing new we did here today. The only thing we did was subclass UITabBarController and get an instance from the storyboard, right? And that same instance, we used it on our subclass of TabBarController. We set its view controllers, okay? And the reason why we were doing that is to set the properties of the data persistence instances, okay? So we ran the code to verify that it is working. Okay, our lab photo updates as normal. I could add more events here. Right? I could close my app and run my app again. And my event is still here. I could delete my event. Okay, perfect. After class, we'll come back and we will talk about how do, like when I delete something here, I want to update or I want to add it to this particular view, okay? So we'll answer that question after break, right? When we come back after lunch, we'll answer that question through code. When I remove an item from this guy, how do I get it to load in my completed table view, okay? Any hints as to what we could do here before we actually stop lesson? Anyway, anybody has any hints as to how we'll get our item out of this particular guy and add it here? Delegation. So Sering says we'll use delegation. Can you elaborate on that? Like how would we?
You say if you delete it, pass it to the next view controller.
Exactly. So if we remove it from this particular view controller, I swipe here, this guy needs to get notified like, hey, the data changed. So take that data and add it into your table view, right? So we'll do that using custom delegation, okay? Any questions about where we headed? Okay? So this is where we headed after lunch, okay? How many people have not working projects? Put your hands up. So we have 3-ish there. So we'll help you guys after, during the break. But we'll stop here and we'll come back after lunch to finish off. I think that's it pretty much at the end to come back and talk about custom delegation, add the custom delegation, and have the completed table view populate with those. Okay? So we'll end here.